Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. And to those who will watch online later, also thank you so much. It's nice to be here and to have this opportunity. So yeah, thank you. I assume you've seen last week's presentation. Shayla, you weren't here physically last week. I assume you've caught up that? Yeah, great. So I'll just touch on a little bit to refresh what we did last week and then expand from there. But first things first, let's make sure we've got a really good motivation and making it a Buddhist practice by going for refuge. So just taking a moment to really physically and mentally be present. And being just so incredibly grateful that we have all these conditions, the inner conditions, outer conditions, to be able to access the most precious teachings of the Buddha and to use them, to actualize them, not only to free ourselves from suffering, samsara, but also to bring all sentient beings from being under the control of karma and afflictions and experiencing endless suffering, and instead bring them to enlightenment. Then we can really, truly live out the meaning, the most purposeful meaning of actually having this precious human rebirth. And so we can jump to refuge and prayers like that. Hang on, I'm good with this one. Okay, so we can imagine Guru Shakyamuni Buddha in front of us. Remember, the whole purpose of reliance on Buddha Dhamma Sangha is for the purpose of liberation. And we can think great liberation, enlightenment. And we can even imagine ourselves sitting at Vulture's Peak together with Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara and surrounded by all the arhats and bodhisattvas and so forth. And with a sincere heart to take these teachings deep into one's practice for the welfare of all sentient beings. And such a goal, whether it be liberation or enlightenment, cannot come about without the wisdom realizing emptiness, lack of inherent existence. And so as much as possible, with as much understanding, not only oneself, but even the action of actively listening, participating, reflecting, meditating on the teachings themselves, all sentient beings, everything completely empty of existing from its own side. A dependent arising. And so because it is empty, it can arise the results we seek, consummate happiness for self and others. So we can go for refuge together if you like. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. And then let's just bring to mind Guru Manjushri. We can imagine Guru Manjushri on the crown of our head, and throughout streaming forth white nectar and light rays to purify all the hindrances, obscurations, anything that stops us from being able to come to realize, in particular, wisdom realizing emptiness through these precious teachings on the Heart Sutra. And then even when we get up to the mantra, we might just do it, say, maybe 21 times, bringing in purifying golden nectar and light rays to bring the realization. So first to purify, then to bring in the realizations. Obeisance to my guru and protector Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by defilements or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the patient love of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, whose dragon thunder proclamation of the Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, whose powerful sword of wisdom hews down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. I entreat you, O Manjushri, whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfection of a bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. O Manjushri, O loving one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Amarapasanadi, Amarapasanadi, Amarapasanadi. Amarapasanadi. We can even imagine Guru Manjushri blesses our minds completely and dissolves into us as our protector. And so for the welfare of all sentient beings, keeping them in mind as much as possible, we can engage in these most precious teachings. And so last week, we actually got quite far, despite it feeling like we didn't get that far, because we got all the way up to this extensive answer, form is emptiness, form is empty, emptiness is form. And that's as far as we proceeded. So I'll just go back and have a quick review of that. And then what we can do is go beyond. My intention this week would be to have a look at the path of seeing. So we were looking at path of accumulation, path of preparation with that form is empty, emptiness is form first. And my intention is to get to the path of seeing, which is still part of this extensive answer. So let's just have a quick revision of form is empty, emptiness is form. And so remember what we're doing here is going through the extensive answer for people who need a little bit more words to grasp the meaning, what they call dull faculty bodhisattvas. They just lack they lack the merit of the sharp faculty. So therefore it takes them longer to realize things. It's not as quick. And so therefore the answer is more extensive. So this fourfold approach in this part of the verse, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. This fourfold approach to understanding emptiness at first is in form, right? In relation to form, then it'll look at, say, for instance, the form aggregate. So for instance, the body, but all forms, and then it'll look at feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. So form being the body, the other four being the mind. And this fourfold approach that we have looked at already, form is empty. What's it empty of? So it's empty of a particular way of existing. It's empty of that. So how does it exist is like the positive side of how it exists and how it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist independently or inherently like that. So how does it exist? It exists as not being this, and it exists as being that. So it exists as not being inherently existent lacking inherent existence, empty of inherent existence. And you can elaborate that in whichever way of, empty of existing from its own side, empty of existing truly, empty of existing by way of its own characteristics. All of that coming down to, if you just need to hold on to one word, it's empty of being independent, isolated, independent, not reliant. So it doesn't exist independently. So therefore, how does it exist? Dependently. Okay, so form is empty. Empty of what? Empty of inherent nature, which means that if it's empty of being independent, the opposite of independent is dependent. So how does form exist? If form is empty, it means it is dependently arisen. So form exists in dependence on cause and conditions and parts, and we looked at that in more elaborate detail last week. Form exists merely labeled by the mind outwardly in dependence on its basis, that which is suitable to be form. There's nothing coming from the side of the object that is form. There's nothing coming from the side of the object that is, appearing by way of its own characteristic or from its own side. In fact, form is merely imputed by the mind outwardly in a one direction onto a valid basis of designation. But within that basis of designation, those parts, there is not one particular part that we can look at and say, there it is, that's form. That's the illustration of form from its own side, existing independently within that basis or inherently or anything like that. So its form does arise in dependence on cause and conditions, parts, and being merely labeled by the mind on a valid basis that functions in a particular way, that we've all agreed that this is form. So form is empty. Because it is empty means it's not independent, therefore it is dependent. So when we look at form as empty, we're looking at that empty of inherent existence there. We're looking at the ultimate truth, the emptiness, with form as empty. So the emphasis being on the empty of inherent existence. Okay? That one should be okay, right? So then form is empty, emptiness is form. So because things are empty, because things are not independent, and therefore because they are dependent, it's like within that emptiness, things can arise. Because things lack independent existence, they can arise out of that state of emptiness. So we say form is a manifestation or an expression of emptiness. Within emptiness, form can arise. Emptiness is the basis, this ultimate truth, this basis that allows the dependent origination of form. So because things are empty, dependency is possible. Arising from cause and conditions is possible, depending on parts, depending on the mind that merely labels, designates to the valid basis of designation, the object. So here we're looking at the conventional truth side of form. Emptiness is a quality of that, okay? And it's due to emptiness, this lack of independence, that things can arise. So we're emphasizing more the form here, that form being an expression arising out of emptiness. But it's not to be like taken in a real literal sense as if the emptiness exists first and then the form arises from that. And that's also not the case because emptiness is permanent. So it's not like a cause, it's not impermanent, it cannot cause form. So we have to understand it in a particular way that, basically because things are empty of inherent existence, they can arise because otherwise they'd be independent and non-reliant. Okay, so I think it's a nice way to keep in mind always emptiness with dependent arising and dependent arising with emptiness. And that way, I feel we're moving in a good direction. We're not going to fall into nihilism and things like this. So does that seem a little bit clear? Form is empty, emptiness is form? Or do you still have some non-understanding, misunderstandings? Michael, is that a hand up?
No, it's a thumbs up. I got it.
Oh, cool, cool. Okay, brilliant. Then let's go on to look at the next two pairs. And just on this, some translations say form is emptiness, right? And I think we discussed off camera last week, that it wasn't that. But just to reiterate, it's not a good translation, form is emptiness, because, emptiness is a non-affirming negation. It's a complete absence, a lack. There's nothing asserted in its place. Nothing is affirmed. Whereas form's a positive phenomenon, like it's the book and all these things are very tangible objects that are positive. It's not as if we're looking at a lack of something. So, and also form is impermanent, derived from causes and conditions. Emptiness is permanent. It's, non-momentary and all that sort of stuff. So we're not saying that form is emptiness, not like that. So there's many other things, but we won't go into all of that. But just notice that that's sometimes a translation. And when it is translated like that, bring the meaning of form is empty. So that will, help clarify any confusion about that. So form is empty, emptiness is form. So then let's look at the other two aspects of the fourfold approach, number 3 and 4. And here we've got the lines, emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. So what we're looking at here is the coming together of the conventional truth and ultimate truth onto one basis. So emptiness is not inherently different from form. So this, qualified with inherently there. It's not inherently different. It is different, emptiness and form, but not inherently different. They're not unrelated and, standalone, isolated, self-establishing like this. They're not inherently different. So this points out that form's empty aspect, and it's not separate from the form. So when the form, let's say a cup, when the form comes into existence, the emptiness of that cup also comes into existence. When the cup is smashed, the emptiness of that cup also goes out of existence. So the two arise together and cease together. They are one entity. It's not that you've got the form body here and the emptiness over there somewhere else. It's not like that. These two are coming together like two sides of one coin. One's looking at the conventional truth, one at the ultimate truth. And then the fourth one is, quite similar here to the earlier one, where form is not a different entity. So, we can't separate the two, like a cat and a dog are two different entities, unrelated in that sense to each other. You can remove the cat and still see the dog. We can't do something like that with form and the emptiness of form, because they are one entity. They go together. They cannot be isolated like that, other than conceptually isolating it. In thinking about it, we can think about form separate to emptiness, but we can't actually separate the two. So this is what we call the two aspects of a single phenomenon: emptiness, which is the ultimate truth, emptiness of form, and then the conventional truth, form itself. So they're one entity or the same entity, but we can think about them. They are different. Remember, I said they are different, but not inherently different. They're different by name. We can think about emptiness of form, or we can think about the form itself, and we can think about them differently. But they can't actually be separated. They're one entity. So, for instance, water, it's wet and moist, right? But we can't separate the wetness and the moistness of the water. We can think about it differently, but we can't separate the wetness from the water. Or like this cushion, the gold of the cushion that I'm sitting on right now, and the cushion itself, I can't separate the gold from the cushion and place it over here separate to the cushion itself. So these two are together on one entity, and like that. So the form and the emptiness go together as two sides of one coin is a good way of thinking about it. So that's the so there I've just got here, dependent arising or appearance and emptiness come to the same point. They're not contradictory. So we can look at things from the side of being a dependent arising. We can look at it from the side of being emptiness. And these get down to the same meaning. So they're not synonymous in all ways. We said form wasn't emptiness, right? Form is not emptiness. Form is empty. So they're not like the same in all ways, but the meaning is the same. Dependent arising, depending on causes and conditions, parts merely labeled. If something is dependent, it's not independent, isolated. So because things are empty, they can arise. Because they're empty, they are a dependent arising. Because things are empty, things do depend on causes and conditions and parts. So how do they exist? Dependently. Okay. How do they not exist? They don't exist independently. They don't exist inherently. They're empty of that. They're empty of inherent existence, which means they are dependently arisen. If something is dependently arisen, necessarily it's dependent and not independent. So necessarily it's not inherently existent. If something is dependently arisen, necessarily it is empty of inherent existence. So these two go together beautifully, dependent arising and emptiness. All right, so looking at that section, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. Then this form is empty of inherent existence, and that emptiness is the ultimate nature of that particular form, which exists and functions and is, merely labeled by the mind on a valid basis. And its emptiness is not inherently different from form, and form is not a different entity from its emptiness. So in this way, I'm just going to make sure my phone's on Do Not Disturb. So in this way, this is just like a summary of those verses. In this way, it's applied to form, but then we would also go on to look at feeling, which we can look at briefly as well. Recognition, karmic formations, consciousness. So form is just the illustration here in the Heart Sutra, but then we go on to apply that to the other four mind aggregates. So before we do that, though, another way of looking at form is empty, emptiness is form. If form is empty, it means that it's not inherently existent. It's empty of inherent existence. So because form is empty, we're not going to fall into the extreme of holding things to exist independently, permanently, with this absolute sense of self. We're not going to fall into that extreme of existence. And so form is empty of that. And so we're going to find the middle way, because form is empty and then emptiness is form, because things are lacking in inherent existence. They do exist. How do they exist? Well, they don't exist independently. How do they exist? They exist dependently. And so through emptiness, we don't fall into the nihilism thinking things don't exist at all. We've refuted how they don't exist. They don't exist independently. They don't exist inherently. So we've refuted that. They're not like that. So how are they? They are dependently arisen. So we don't fall into nihilism through emptiness, because emptiness is refuting how they don't exist independently. So how do they exist? Dependently. So it's not that we fall into the extreme of thinking emptiness means nothing exists at all. Not like that at all. Very far from that. Things do exist. How do they exist? Dependently. We've refuted them being independent through emptiness, empty of inherent existence, empty of independent existence. So they're not that. So how are they? They are dependently arisen. So these lines here, we can stop the two extremes of falling into eternalism, absolutism, the extreme of existence, and the extreme of non-existence, thinking things don't exist at all. So this is quite beautiful to make sure that we're abiding in the middle way there. not falling to extremes. Then the other two pairs, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In that way, it sort of brings together this dependent arising and emptiness, and it brings it together on one basis, one entity. And so because things, I wrote here to make it a bit easier, because it is empty, it is a dependent arising. Because it is a dependent arising, it is empty. So bringing those two aspects together on one basis, one entity. Okay? So this way we're not falling to extremes of existence or non-existence. We're abiding in the middle way by bringing together dependent arising and emptiness of inherent existence. So this is going to take, quite some time to process and to reflect on. And, this is a lifetime journey. So an explanation over 10 minutes isn't, going to be enough for us, but we'll need to again and again and again think about this and how, refute misunderstandings. And the common one is that emptiness means nothingness. And we've already looked at this with 3 principal aspects of the path and the 4 truths when we did those earlier courses, and even in this course, now. So then, if we have a look at feeling, so using this 4-fold approach to understand emptiness, but relate it to the feeling aggregate. So having done the body now, let's look at one part of the mind. So the feeling is what we're talking about there is in like the experience. So our experience of things, it's a mental factor, it's in the entity of experience, and our experience in the sense of, finding pleasure or pain or something that's neither of those two, quite neutral. What we're looking at is with feeling, there is this experience of pleasure, this is an experience of pain or neutrality, but these are not inherently existent feelings. So the feeling is empty, okay? Which means that feeling, remember, is dependent. What does it depend on? Cause and conditions and parts and merely labeled by the mind. So because feeling is empty means it is dependent. Because feeling is dependent, it means it is empty of inherent existence. So here we're emphasizing the empty of inherent existence part. Feeling is empty. And we'll have a look at that in a little bit more detail soon, but let's just look at the 4 approaches, the 4-fold approach here. So just on that as well. So feeling is empty. We'll go on to emptiness is feeling. So remember, emptiness is a quality of the feeling. It's the ultimate truth side of the feeling. So whatever the feeling is, pleasant or unpleasant, painful or happiness and so forth, that, because it is empty and dependent, it means it's not fixed, it's not independent, self-existent. It's actually coming together in dependence on cause and conditions and parts, but in response, affected by conditions, causes. So what we tend to do is hold on to a feeling of it is like that in a quite an unmoving sort of way, don't we? We get stuck in our feelings, whether they be good or bad. We might crave after more of that or have aversion in response to negative feelings. And, we kick off all of these afflictions, attachment, aversion, and so forth, intensified craving and grasping and like that. So because we're holding on to these feelings as existing independently in some sort of fixed self-existent way, instead of seeing feelings like a water bubble, that they are subject to change, they're so fleeting in themselves, they're changing momentarily because they are impermanent. So no sooner have they arisen that they subside, but we lock on and hold on to it and perpetuate this fixed type of feeling and make it, ongoing, causing so much suffering for ourselves because we can't let things go. We lock them into a space and time and hold on to it as if it's never going to change. And then all the conceptualization and, all the afflictions and karma and suffering that comes from not seeing them as empty. So whether it be a pleasurable feeling or a painful feeling, these feelings are not lasting. They're unstable, and the suffering of change, this pleasure, is so unreliable, so unstable, not lasting. Yes, temporary happiness, a moment of happiness, but then it can also, if we prolong that, it can quickly change into a suffering of pain. So, and this neutral is like a ticking time bomb. It can give rise to pain or pleasure in any moment. So all of these feelings, if we can come to see, feeling as like a water bubble in that sense of momentary in its lasting, just a moment, very temporary, very changeable by cause and conditions, even just a slight change in cause and conditions, then we can move out of a certain feeling into a neutrality, for instance. So if we're going 100 miles down the highway and you can't go straight into reverse, right? You're going to have to slow through the gears to slow down and then, do a U-turn. In the same way, if our feelings have really taken off, sometimes we can't just reverse that feeling and go from a pleasure to a pain to a pleasure, or pleasure, to a pain. It just doesn't work like that. We've often got to go into a neutral. So if we're in extreme pain and challenge and so forth, mental pain, physical pain, quite often we've got to go into a neutral state before we can transform it into something, like looking at it in a healthy way, in a more seeing the benefits of the suffering or the pain, utilizing it, say with Tonglen, things like this. So sometimes if we've got too much traction on a particular feeling and we just can't seem to escape, say it's a mental feelings, and with that goes the mental dialogue and the aversion and all of this coming together, 100 miles an hour, then sometimes we just got to get into our body and get physical, go for a walk, do something physical to get out of our head. But if we can try to develop a practice of seeing the feelings as momentary, as changing, and as so unreliable, and therefore just tweaking causing conditions, then the feelings are going to change. So we don't need to lock onto a feeling and hold it as existing like that, independently, as if it's always going to be like that. So this is where we can become our own therapist in relation to the feeling aggregate and guard the conditions. What conditions do I find myself in where I'm typically giving rise to unpleasant feelings, or that are bringing up pleasurable feelings that I lock on to and crave and grasp and perpetuate negative karma and so forth. So, taking responsibility for the conditions that we put ourselves in, knowing what type of feelings they give rise to through our reflections on how we are in certain environments with certain people and so forth, certain objects, and then where necessary, protecting us, from those conditions so that we're not, giving rise to unhealthy states of mind, unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friends, but trying to protect the environment so that we can cultivate virtue, the cause of happiness, and so forth. So this feeling is empty. Emptiness is feeling. Emptiness is not other than feeling, and feeling is also not other than emptiness. So, these two are one entity. The feeling and its emptiness as well is one entity. And so the whole time what we're seeing here is that feeling, having that quality of being empty, means it is dependently arisen. And so therefore, it exists in dependence on causes and conditions and parts and merely labeled. We've got the two truths coming together here on one basis. So if we ourselves were to reflect, and then we'd extend this to the remaining aggregates, discrimination and so forth, compositional factors, consciousness. So if we were to reflect on feeling, for instance, and we think about, the various causes and conditions that give rise to a pleasant feeling. There are so many causes and conditions coming together. We often isolate as if it's one cause. That is the cause of my happiness. That is the cause of my suffering. So we isolate just one cause, and then we lock onto the feeling as if it always has to be like this, or I can never let it go, and things like that. Or, why is it always like this? And why am I always so lonely and disconnected and unloved and, in pain and all of this sort of stuff? And, instead of locking into it, giving rise to, reflecting on it being empty. Feeling is empty. Feeling is empty of being independently existing. Therefore, it is dependent. So what is it dependent upon? This multitude of causes and conditions coming together to assemble as the parts of feeling and merely labeled by the mind, how we label things. So, there's so many causes and conditions that come together. It's never just one. And even if we have a pleasant, a feeling of happiness, well, that has arisen in dependence on past virtue. And, so, and then even non-virtue, our unhappiness, our pain and suffering has arisen in dependence on non-virtue. So if we don't like the pain and the suffering, then we need to counter the non-virtue. We need to stop its arising. And one of the best ways of doing this is, through a Tonglen practice of taking on all the suffering and pain of all sentient beings, utilizing the suffering in the path, utilizing it to destroy the self-cherishing, and sending out all our love and virtue and good conditions for others to enjoy, all our roots of virtue and so forth. So seeing that suffering has good qualities, it destroys our arrogance and our pride, and it helps us develop renunciation, wanting to be free of suffering, wanting to be free of samsara. And it helps us develop compassion, of course, and Tonglen's a beautiful way of taking on that suffering of others, developing compassion, knowing how painful it is to suffer and not wanting that for others, and then giving them our love and so forth. So, utilizing the teachings on, Shantideva, I think it was verse 621, comes to mind of the good qualities of suffering, which we've looked at previously. And, Tonglen practice and utilizing, the Heart Sutra, feeling is empty, and, looking at the dependency. And so, past virtue, past non-virtue, giving rise to pleasure and pain. But even just the fact that we have this body and mind that we name and form, right? That we have taken in the 12 links, this name and form, that we have taken independence under the control of karma and afflictions, so that whatever happiness we experience is only temporary, is only contaminated because the nature of our body and mind under the control of karma and afflictions is contaminated. So looking at, causes that come together to produce this feeling in dependence on name and form, and having the various sense powers and sense organs, and contact, mental factor of contact and contact with the object, then, we can give rise to a feeling in response to something that's pleasurable. We can give rise to happiness, something that's painful, something that's not pleasurable. We can generate the feeling of pain. So, it depends on the previous moment of mind. Feeling accompanies all of our consciousnesses. So, necessarily we have consciousness to experience feeling. So there are so many causes and conditions coming together, and object was just one of them, but we tend to blame the object as the cause of my problems or my suffering or my unhappiness, my pain, or, the opposite, the pleasure, and we latch onto it, lust after it, crave it, can't be separated from it. So many causes and conditions coming together, many parts, assembling the in particular the sense power and the consciousness and the object all coming together with the feeling. So when we diagnose the aggregate of feeling, when we analyze the aggregate of feeling, we see how it is so dependently arisen and dependent on so many causes and conditions. In this way, it is dependently arisen, therefore it's not independent, it's not inherently existent. Feeling is empty of that, empty of inherent existence. And so if we're giving analysis to emptiness, or even dependent arising, even merely labeled by the mind, then what we're stopping in its tracks is what flows on from grasping at inherent existence, which is the conceptualization and all of the self-talk, the negative talk, and all the incessant storylines we tell ourselves, exaggerating how things are. And then from that, the afflictions, karma, and suffering. So we stop this perpetuation of true origins, karma and afflictions. We stop this perpetuation of suffering when we counter the root ignorance, this fundamental ignorance grasping at a self. When we counter that with analysis on emptiness or dependent arising, that's going to be targeting that very root, so that what follows on from that cannot arise in those moments. So analyzing, feeling is empty and so forth, can be a way of stopping that traction of going down this non-virtue. And if you can't do that, then what we might need to do is go back to a neutral state, even just meditation on the breath. The breath is neutral, getting in the body, going for a walk, these sorts of things. And then once we're sort of more in a neutral state, then doing an analysis, it can be a good thing. Feeling is empty, emptiness is feeling, like this. So also worth reflection is, it the object or is it the feeling that I'm attached to? And particularly if we're in a bad relationship and these sorts of things, ones that we know are deal breakers, but, those moments of goodness, classic situation is, domestic violence and then, the partner's so sorry and then comes back with all these lovely gifts and, big apologies and all of these, stories that make us feel good in those moments, that keep us locked into situations that are really very harmful. Is it the object or the feeling? So when we break up in a relationship, was it really the person that I was attached to, or was it the feeling that I was attached to, of feeling loved and wanted and validated and needed and all of these sorts of things? So when we privately investigate, what it is, if it's a bad relationship we're getting out of, then doing that sort of reflection can be good, because we may find it's not the object at all that brought us the happiness and the good feelings and the validation and all of these things. It was that feeling. And surely that feeling is something that we can generate independently from, as in separated from, not with the object. We can even just recall certain things and generate a feeling in response to that, without having to be even physically near the object. So, looking at our feelings and looking at them in these various parts and their various, causes and conditions and so forth, and not reifying and holding on to and locking into it being independent, but, loosening and allowing the flow to see, the momentary change and the dependency and, all of this coming together, because feeling is empty. Emptiness is feeling, so like this, this is obviously like homework, right? To do these exercises, or if we were in a retreat situation, to do these exercises for the next half hour. But obviously we don't have that leisure here and now. So whether it be pleasant or unpleasant feelings or, neutral feeling, these are empty of inherent existence. Here's the reasoning: because they are dependent arising, because they are dependent on causes and conditions and parts and so forth. So we're not locked into a particular feeling. And in fact, what we want to ideally do is be able to come to see that all feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, whilst we're under the control of karma and afflictions, are completely contaminated. It's all contaminated. We're seeking lasting happiness, ultimate happiness within samsara, which can only give momentary, temporary happiness before it quickly turns into something else. So, trying to bring in renunciation and so forth. All right. So, in conclusion to feelings, feelings are empty. They're not fixed, not solid or unchanging, and we're not locked in. Because they're empty means they can change. From within a state of emptiness, things can arise, feelings can arise because things are empty. So because they're empty, feelings can change. We can develop, we can overcome painful experiences. We can overcome contaminated happiness even. We can overcome these samsaric feelings and actually develop all the way to consummate happiness, Buddhahood, So we can transform our mind, transform even our feelings and so forth. So remembering how unstable feelings are, fleeting like a water bubble, completely contaminated, coming out of karma and afflictions, and that they are a form of suffering. Even the pleasure is a contaminated pleasure, and it's a true suffering. While we're samsaric beings, it is a true suffering, and therefore something to be abandoned, something to overcome. And so when we're stuck in our feelings and concretizing, locking into, something like this, reciting the Heart Sutra, and then reflecting when we get to that part of the Heart Sutra on the feeling aggregate. Okay, so a bit of homework to really reflect on that aspect of feeling. I won't go through discrimination is empty, emptiness is discrimination, compositional factors are empty, emptiness is compositional factors, and so forth. Consciousness is empty, emptiness is consciousness, and like this. So what I'd like to get to the path of seeing today. So wouldn't that be nice if we could get to the path of seeing today in reality? All right. So the path of seeing, this part of the Heart Sutra. So we've gone through Mahayana path of accumulating great merit, and then path of preparation, really, instead of focusing on the merit, accumulation of merit, focusing on the development of wisdom, on the path of preparation. So we're conceptually realizing emptiness at that point. But then what happens when we get to the path of seeing? There is that breakthrough. So no longer realizing emptiness, independence on a generic image, a mental image. And we discussed last week about the mental image of our car, when we bring to mind our car as using a generic image, and the lack of clarity compared to seeing the car with our eye consciousness, how vivid it is. So obviously just an analogy doesn't work in all ways, but in the same way, now no longer realizing emptiness through the medium of a generic image. And so we're getting, full high definition vividness of only emptiness, only the lack of inherent existence appearing to that Arya beings, meditative equipoise, non-conceptually realizing emptiness. So from the path of seeing, one becomes an Arya being. From the path of seeing, one necessarily has that, rather than perceptual, better to use non-conceptual realization of emptiness, since we're talking Prasangi consequent school tenets. So one becomes an Arya, or a superior being. It's a the first non-conceptual realization of emptiness when we get to a path of seeing. one develops a true path. So now we have the actual Dharma jewel in our continuum. We become a Sangha jewel. And that powerful antidote is going to be so powerful that it can abandon, the wisdom realizing emptiness can abandon, in this case, seeing abandonments, intellectually acquired obscurations like this. And then on the path of meditation, the innate obscurations, the afflictive obscurations. And then once we've abandoned those, then on the pure grounds of the path of meditation, the Bodhisattva's 8th, 9th, 10th ground, then abandoning the knowledge obscurations. When we've abandoned these in various stages across the path of seeing and then path of meditation, when we've abandoned the 2 obscurations, we attain the path of no more learning, Buddhahood. So this path of seeing, this is the first ground of a Bodhisattva, of the 10th, of the 10 grounds, like this. Okay. So the verse, I was just thinking, before we start this, I'd like to, what I was remiss in doing that I wanted to do, I wanted to recite the Heart Sutra from the beginning before we start the path of seeing and stuff. And I could have done it a lot earlier, but I missed a link that I was going to try to remember to go to. So if we might be able to just recite the Heart Sutra, so that way we can get, we can recite up to what we've covered so far, then we can start the path of seeing, have a look at the path of seeing, and then we can conclude with the end of the recitation. Yeah, it's okay? Thank you. So this is the verse that we recite before reciting the Heart Sutra, praising the perfection of wisdom, remembering that to realize emptiness exactly as it is and to convey that is actually quite indescribable and inconceivable and inexpressible and so forth. We can use words, obviously, which we are, to try to come closer to understanding emptiness, but to explain emptiness exactly as it is in the appearance of the Arya's meditative equipoise, non-conceptually realizing emptiness is actually beyond words, beyond conception and so forth. So let's just recite up to the path of seeing, if we may. The indescribable, inconceivable, and inexpressible perfection of wisdom, unproduced, unceasing, the nature of space, object of the uniquely knowing transcendental wisdom, to the mother of the victorious ones of the 3 times, I prostrate. And then notice the headings in yellow just for our own navigation. I prostrate to the 3 noble, rare, sublime ones. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on a massive vulture's mountain in Rajgriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Please do recite on, but just with the audio, it'll jangle if we have our audio off, but please do continue to recite together so we can make it more powerful and precious. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. So if we stop there and go back to where we were up to. Okay, so we looked at the beginning of the path of seeing. So here we see this is the way to train on the path of seeing, and I've already elaborated, some of those things. One thing I didn't mention is that from the path of seeing, one is definite in lineage. So they're definite to attain the result, the path of no more learning from that point. It becomes definite. They're not going to fall back and so forth. All right. So just as the 5 aggregates lack inherent existence, so are all phenomena. So all permanent phenomena, all impermanent phenomena, even emptiness itself, which is a permanent phenomena, even emptiness lacks inherent existence. Okay? Emptiness of inherent existence itself is empty of inherent existence. There is no emptiness that exists truly, as I think it's in the mind-only school say that emptiness is truly established, truly existent. It's not like that with the higher schools. They even refute that. So even emptiness itself lacks inherent existence. So what we're looking at on the path of seeing from this perspective of the Heart Sutra is 8 profound attributes. Now, they can be subsumed within what we call the 3 doors of liberation: emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness. And these 2, signlessness and wishlessness, they can be condensed into emptiness. So the 8 into the 3 into the 1, emptiness. So it elaborates. So we're looking here at all phenomena, permanent phenomena and impermanent phenomena. All phenomena are going to be seen to be empty of inherent existence. And using these 3 doors, so the first one, we look at the entity. So emptiness, the first door, looks at the entity. So it's all looking at emptiness, but just from a different point of view. One's from the point of view of the entity itself, the thing itself. It is empty of inherent existence. Although it is empty of inherent existence, it does appear nominally as an object. So we're not refuting conventionalities. Things do exist nominally in name only, but they're not independent. They're not inherent. They're empty of that. So they're empty of one way of existing. And how do they exist? In another, they exist dependently. So it's not that, it is that. It's not inherently existent, it is dependently existent. So it's nominally existent. So one's looking at emptiness. The first door is looking at the entity lacks inherent existence. Whatever the phenomenon is, it's empty. Then the next 2, signlessness and wishlessness, they look at the causes being empty of inherent existence, and then the results are empty of inherent existence. So this is going to be looking at, 8 different ways of refuting inherent existence, independence on the entity, causes, or the results. So basically, all of samsara, all of nirvana, whichever way we enter into cyclic existence or leave cyclic existence, abandon cyclic existence, all of it only comes together and is possible because it is empty of inherent existence. So it's dependently arisen. Our samsara is dependently arisen. We saw that true suffering is dependently arisen. It arises in dependence on true origins, karma and afflictions. Because true suffering has a cause, true origins, and that cause, the chief cause is this ignorance grasping at a self, which is erroneous, a wrong consciousness. Because that cause of suffering can be abandoned, overcome by a powerful antidote, this true path, we can stop the cause of our suffering which means we will stop the suffering itself. So samsara can be abandoned because we can cultivate true paths, like the wisdom, realizing emptiness, and so forth. We can cultivate true paths and eventually abandon those obscurations to bring about true cessation, this ultimate true cessation of liberation, enlightenment. So looking at all of this, so the first door is the door of emptiness. So phenomena are not inherently existent. By their very nature, their very entity, it is the lack of inherent existence. And so all phenomena, is emptiness in the sense of lack of inherent existence. So whether we look at the entity of phenomena or whether we look at the characteristics of the phenomena, the defining characteristics, whether it be general characteristics of, the product being impermanent, a product changing momentarily, whether we look at the particular model, the shape, the size, the color, the various attributes, the various characteristics of an object, these, yes, they exist, but they don't exist inherently. Because they don't exist inherently, they are dependently arisen. So then whatever causes we look at, whatever products that we attach to and grasp at and crave, and even just, the five aggregates themselves, holding ourselves, our body and mind and the self, the person even, holding it to inherently exist is how we perpetuate samsara. But if we can come to see that all products, all impermanent phenomena that arise in dependence on a cause are all lacking inherent existence. So here, all phenomena lack inherent existence, and particularly the focus on the doors of signlessness is those that are caused phenomenon, products. So yes, things are produced in dependence on a cause and condition, but they're not inherently produced. They don't come from an inherently existent cause. And so this is in the part of that Heart Sutra, looking at empty, without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain. So yes, things that are arisen from a cause do cease, but they don't inherently cease. So when we look at things like stainless, when we look at true origins, true sufferings, when we look at the stains we have in our continuum, they are adventitious, aren't they? So we do have obscurations. These do exist, but they haven't penetrated, our obscurations, our afflictions and so forth, haven't penetrated into the very nature of the mind, so that they can be separated. They are temporary. They can be removed with a powerful antidote. So this is the meaning of stainless here, that these stains, yes, we have stains, but they're not inherently existent stains. So afflictions arise independent on a cause, but not inherently existent cause, not inherently existent afflictions. And so all the ways we enter into samsara are lacking inherent existence. Therefore, we can reverse samsara because it is dependently arisen. So when we look at the next one, not without stains, sometimes free of stains, it says in the Heart Sutra. Here, for instance, true paths are a cause. Okay, they change moment to moment, and permanence, mind, a consciousness. True paths is a consciousness, generally. So these true paths are free of stains. Depend on a cause, yes, but not an inherently existent cause. Okay, so I excluded true cessations from there because it's not a cause. We can say in quotes it's a cause, that true paths cause true cessations, but true cessations is not, an actual cause and result like that in that sense. It's true cessations is, from the Prasangika point of view, is emptiness. It's permanent. It's it's permanent. It's emptiness. So I excluded for that reason true paths, true cessations. So looking at the door of signlessness, that even causes lack inherent existence. So these true paths that lack inherent existence are dependently arisen, can be powerful antidotes to destroy our samsara and bring about true cessation, bring about nirvana, great liberation, enlightenment. So whatever we wish for, the results we wish for, they too lack inherent existence. Just as the causes that will produce those results lacked inherent existence, likewise the results themselves lack inherent existence. And so all of this is related to the path of seeing. So all sentient beings wish for happiness, don't we? And wish to not have any pain and anxiety and suffering and depression and all the problems that we face. So this is innate within all of us, perhaps as an expression of our Buddha nature, seeking this consummate happiness and wanting to be free of suffering and so forth. So whatever we wish for, these results, whether we want the abandonment of faults, the abandonment of obscurations, to my mind, I think of Sangye, Buddha in Tibetan, Sangye, the abandonment of the two obscurations, and then the fulfillment of all the realizations, all the qualities that we seek, and with that consummate happiness. So the results that we wish for, not deficient, it says in the Heart Sutra. There is decrease of our faults and objects of abandonment, afflictive obscurations, knowledge obscurations, but they don't inherently decrease. So meditate on true paths. That's powerful to be able to abandon objects of afflictive obscurations, knowledge obscurations. The object of abandonment, when we meditate on true paths, it does decrease. Decreases from the path of seeing. We now have powerful antidote to abandon a portion of afflictions at each of those true paths across the path of seeing, path of meditation. So there is this decrease. There is this extinguishment of all obscurations when we get to the path of no more learning. But it's just not inherently decreasing, inherently extinguished. So this is what these 8 profound attributes are talking about in this Heart Sutra, and illustrated through looking at the path of seeing. Remember, with the Heart Sutra, what's explicitly getting taught here is emptiness, but implicit to that is the stages of the path that the Bodhisattva goes through to get to a state of Buddhahood, how Bodhisattva reflects on emptiness at each of the 5 stages. So not deficient, not fulfilled. So the results that we seek, the completion of all qualities, this expansion of all realizations, Buddhahood, for instance, consummate wisdom and love and power, ability, and all of those things that just effortlessly and spontaneously arise when we get to that stage to be able to enact the welfare of all sentient beings. Whatever we seek as a result, that fulfillment, yes, there is the completion of qualities, there is this increase of qualities, as there's this decrease of negative attributes and faults, there's with that there is this increase of qualities, but both of these results that we seek happen dependently. They're not inherently existent. Okay, so not fulfilled, it's saying the completion of qualities we seek do increase, but not with an inherent increase in qualities. So that's what this section of the Heart Sutra is getting at. All right, so this path of, hello, what's this? Just making sure it wasn't a spider. It was just some sort of bug. So this path of seeing, non-conceptually realizing emptiness. So at this point, when you are non-conceptually realizing emptiness, then what's happening at that stage is only emptiness is appearing, right? So there is this it's non-conceptual. So it's without the use of a generic image. There's no appearance of a conventionality. There's no, even the mind realizing the emptiness. They say it's like pure water mixed with pure water. Like the subject and mind, the mind realizing, the wisdom realizing emptiness, and the object, the emptiness itself, are mixed like pure water mixed with pure water, in the sense that subject and object, the mind and the object, are indistinguishable. Okay, so what else? So free of dualistic appearance of subject and object as being distinct, they're indistinguishable. There's no appearance of inherent existence because you have the powerful antidote, the wisdom realizing the lack of inherent existence. So appearance of inherent existence cannot appear in the face of the wisdom realizing the lack of inherent existence. So this is also one of these dualistic appearances that one is free of in this non-conceptual realization of emptiness. With the conceptual realization of emptiness, before, things did appear inherently existent, even when realizing conceptually lack of inherent existence. Because, for instance, we even had the generic image of, emptiness, and that even that generic image appeared inherently existent. So here, the path of seeing, there's no appearances of subject and object as distinct, no appearances of inherent existence or true existence, and no conventionality appealing. It's only this absence, this lack of inherent existence, this non-affirming negation. Nothing is asserted in its place. It's just this sheer absence, this lack. So when one exits the path of seeing after having abandoned seeing abandonments, then one enters into this subsequent attainment, this post-meditative practice. And at that point, having realized non-conceptually lack of inherent existence of all phenomena, then when phenomena start to appear, because they appear inherently existent, right? So they start to appear, and they appear inherently existent, but now because you've realized non-conceptually emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, you now see whatever appears as false, not true. Things appear one way inherently, but you now know, from having come out of that meditative equipoise, realizing the lack of inherent existence, you now know that these appearances are false. What appears is not true. Back in the meditative equipoise, only emptiness appeared. Only this lack of inherent existence appeared. And what was realized was its lack of inherent existence. So even emptiness lacks inherent existence. So emptiness is true. It appears as lacking inherent existence, and it actually exists that way. Its mode of abidance is lacking inherent existence. So only emptiness is true. And then for non-Buddhas, for sentient beings, every consciousness is mistaken with appearances of inherent existence, except that one Arya's exalted knowledge of meditative equipoise, non-conceptually realizing emptiness. That's unmistaken. But for us, for our sentient beings, every one of our consciousnesses is mistaken because it has these appearances of inherent existence. And when we get to the path of seeing and we exit from there, we, having realized the truth, the true reality, we now see what's not true. We now see appearing to us once again some sort of inherently existent reality. And it's not true, it's false. It doesn't exist like that. It appears to exist inherently, but inherent existence has never existed. It arises due to our imprints of ignorance, beginningless ignorance. So things do appear inherently. But now from the path of seeing, we've actually realized the lack of inherent existence. And so we now know that what appears is false. We now know the way conventionalities exist in this very subtle way, non-inherently existent, merely labeled by the mind, lacking inherent existence. And so therefore, things appear to exist inherently, but inherent existence doesn't exist at all. And conventionalities do exist, things do exist nominally, merely labeled by the mind, independence on a valid base and so forth. And now we realize that things exist like an illusion. Things exist, but it's like an illusion because things don't exist in the way they appear. It's beyond precious and hard for us to get to, but such a realization depends on causes and conditions, right? So we have to cultivate those causes and conditions, and everything we're doing here and now is working in a continuum to get closer and closer and closer to develop that wisdom realizing emptiness. So everything we're doing now is laying the foundations to be able to come close to it. So this inherent existence appears, but does not exist, has never existed. Just like water in a mirage. From a distance, it appears like there's water in a mirage. But as we get closer to the reality, the closer to the perceptual realization of emptiness and so forth, as we get closer to reality of the mirage, we see that there is no water. There is no drinkable water there. So when we get closer to the truth, the path of seeing and so forth, we get closer to the truth, we realize that inherent existence, despite appearing like water mirage, despite appearing, does not exist. Conventionalities do exist. They don't exist inherently. How do they exist? Dependently. So conventionalities are like an illusion. They appear inherently, but don't exist that way at all. How do they exist? They exist depending on cause and conditions and parts and so forth. So in this way, they're like an illusion. Conventionalities do exist. How do they exist? They're empty of inherent existence. They exist dependently. Okay, so let's just have a look at the concluding exercise. So one of the exercises we can try for a week, practice for the entire week, if you like, at least every day, many times within the day, just periodically whenever it comes to mind, or use a post-it note to remind yourself, things like this, to get closer to this realization. What we can do is we can think, when we're doing a walking meditation, but it doesn't have to just be with walking, it's just to give the body a break from sitting all the time. Thinking with every step that everything coming within the sphere of our awareness, our eye consciousness, the shape and the color, the sounds, the tastes, the objects of touch and so forth, whatever we experience is not true. It's false. It appears to inherently exist. It appears to independently exist, as if it's independent from being arisen, independence on causes and conditions and parts, and being merely labeled by the mind, independence on a valid basis that functions in a particular way. Things appear inherently. This is what is not true. And that Arya being has realized the truth, and so knows them to be false through experience. So this sound is not true. This form is not true. This sensation, whatever I'm experiencing with any of my senses, is not true. There is nothing that appears in any way to my physical or even mental sense that appears inherently existent and exists that way. What appears does not exist in actuality in that way, because things appear inherently existent, yet in actuality, their actual way of existing is lacking inherent existence, right? So they appear as inherently existent, yet the way they exist is lacking inherent existence. So because they appear one way, but exist in an entirely opposite way, they're false. They're not true at all. Remember, emptiness in that Ari's exalted knowledge of meditative equipoise, non-conceptually realizing emptiness, that direct perception of emptiness. Emptiness appeared, didn't it, to that Arya? It appeared, this lack of inherent existence. It appeared, and its actual way of existing is lacking inherent existence. So these two are concordant. It appears as lacking inherent existence, and it is lacking inherent existence. And that's why that is the only true consciousness for us sentient beings. Exiting from that meditative equipoise, everything that bombards all of the senses and so forth appears inherently existent, yet it doesn't exist that way at all. It's false. It's not true. So this is the reflection. You can think also even things like everything exists in mere name. It doesn't exist independently, inherently. How does it exist? Dependently, depending on what? Cause, conditions, parts, and so forth. You can even just say it exists in mere name. In mere name. When I search for that inherently existent, whatever the object is, it is not found within its basis of designation. It is merely labeled independence on a valid basis, which functions in a particular way. But within that basis, that collection of parts functioning in a particular way, there is no inherently existent, whatever the object is, found within that basis. What is found when searching for the inherently existent object is the lack of inherent existence. And so when we exit that meditative equipoise and we see that everything's like an illusion, we see that everything's existing merely labeled by the mind. What exists in mere name. It's totally empty, empty of an inherent existence. It's dependently arisen in a very subtle way. How does it exist? It exists in mere name. So any one of those can work well. The idea is habituation, familiarity. So when we're doing this, then we're moving in the direction that we're all seeking of, abandoning contaminated happiness, abandoning true suffering, abandoning true origins, abandoning samsara, and we're walking in the path towards liberation and enlightenment. And so the more we can bring this into our daily reality, if we're shopping, if we're walking, if we're chilling out, watching Netflix or whatever we're doing with our time, bring to mind how it's merely labeled by the mind. What appears is not true. These sort of slogans in some ways, aren't they? So last week, I requested that if you were interested, you could do this exercise of merely labeled. And I'm not sure if anyone was able to do that.
It's okay. Pema, aka Leanne.
Michael, did you want to share anything, or anyone else want to share anything about that experience? No pressure. You don't have to. You can just say pass.
First of all, it was hard to continuously do.
Yes.
I continuously remind myself. But it was actually kind of fun to do. And it made me think a lot about if things inherently exist, but also they inherently exist differently for you than they do for me. Because your eyes don't perceive blue the same, a certain frequency of blue the same way my eyes receive that. And mine don't receive them the same way Shayla does, and Shayla Barbara, and Barbara Heen, and Heen Kathleen, and and so on and so forth. And the same thing's true, is that I don't perceive the table or the chair or the flower or the sun in the same way everybody else does. And so it really kind of brought home, particularly I think for me, because last week and this week with Geshe-la's Sunday talk was dealing with this, and your talk last week dealt with this. And so it was really awakening for me to really start looking at things and saying, hey, you know what? Stop thinking of these things like that. Or rephrase that. It's okay to think of them like that, but they're not really like that. They're not just like that. That you see part of what's going on, and some of what you see may be part of that thing's existence, not inherent, but some of the things you see aren't part of that thing's inherent. It's your karma, your background, your experience that allows you to see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Geshe-la was talking about the table, and I know the table's a big thing, and I thought, well, yeah, if you shrink the table, then you can stand on it, and it's a step stool.
Sure. And it's a home for termites and bugs and whatever else, isn't it? You know, they don't see it as a table. Sounds like to me you're seeing how things are not existing independently, because if they were inherently, we would all have the same perception of them in the same way. Sounds like that's sort of the analysis you might be doing.
Right.
Cool. So yeah, any analysis you can do is perfect. And this one in particular, I find quite gorgeous because what it can do is really loosen things up. So instead of our grasping and fixating and concretizing situations and people and events, and even just our sense of self, if we're walking along, this really loosens. This merely labeled merely labeled walking on this merely labeled path, or driving, or whatever we're doing, it really it feels more fluid. And so one sort of, without meaning to, one just actually steps back and loosens their grip on how things are. And so I find this a really beautiful thing to just bring to mind whatever one's doing on occasions, Michael, whenever one can remember, because we'll actually noticeably feel that loosening, that lessening of the grasping. And then with that lessening of the grasping, there's less fixating on the concepts and the exaggerations and it is like this and it's not like this, and then the afflictions and so forth. There's a real fluidity I find that can come when doing this exercise. So I'd be keen to hear of other experiences, maybe even next week, whichever exercise we do, just so we can try to learn from each other, because we're all beginners in this, just trying to find our way, aren't we? So merely labeled way. This sounds like the one you were doing, Michael, this one at the end, mentally debating the existence of things and analyzing, with what understanding we have of emptiness from Geshe Cherub's class and from these classes and so forth. So this is perfect. Okay. Before we conclude with the recitation of the rest of the Heart Sutra, are there any questions or things outstanding that I've confused you with or something?
Venerable, nobody else has a question. I have one, and this may not be the right place and time for the question.
Okay. Well, let's see, because we can always carry it over to next week otherwise. So
sure,
what's your question?
The question is in the mind only Buddhist. How is their version of inherent existence different?
Yeah. To be honest, my strength is not the mind only. But all of those schools lower than the Prasangika, they all say the same thing, that they conflate inherent existence and existence. Because if things do not inherently exist for them, they don't exist at all. So when you search for that imputed object, whatever it might be, or any object, you can find, it is found within the basis of designation. So it's found within that. And if it's not found, it doesn't exist at all. So inherent existence, or existence, just whatever you say, existence even, is coming down to the same thing. So that's from the Prasangika point of view, saying to them that it's not like that. So things do exist, they don't exist inherently. And when you search for the imputed object, it is not found within the basis of designation. It is merely labeled by the mind in dependence on the basis of designation, coming together and functioning in a particular way that we've all agreed on. This is a chair and a table and so forth. So yeah, without going into the tenets of the, mind only, because it's not my strength. What is my strength? Maybe we should just end here. But yeah, so hopefully that gives you something, Michael, just to be satisfied with, equating existence and inherent existence. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Let's go to conclude with the recitation from the rest of the Heart Sutra. So we covered today in particular, Shariputra, likewise all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. These were those 8 profound attributes, or the 3 doors of liberation. Okay, let's continue. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata gate gate para samgate bodhisoha. And so at that point, what we could do is visualize, Guru Shakyamuni Buddha in front is there. And at the heart is Prajna Paramita, the mother of the perfection of wisdom. And at her heart is the syllable A and the mantra Teatom gate gate para samgate bodhisoha around. And then light rays generate from that mantra garland. And we could recite, we'll just do it 3 times to ourselves, but we could recite a whole mala if we had the leisure. And then for the blessings of Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he's got the Om in the recording. We can just hear the recording and recite a couple to ourselves.
Taya atai om gate gate para samai gate boyande swaha.
And we can think that we receive the blessings of all of our Guru Buddhas to actualize the very meaning of this profound Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. Once you practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you've indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharavataputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the worlds of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Okay, so let's just do some quick dedications and then be gone. Due to this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of a Guru Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then we can recite this second verse here for the swift return of Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So I wish you a wonderful week, and pray that these teachings can be beneficial and hit home, and through daily recitation, things can start to take shape. And the more we increase our Guru devotion, the more it moistens the heart to receive the teachings so that they click and obviously accumulate merit and, purify obscurations, purify negativities. And then we have the perfect foundation for these teachings to make good sense for us, to realize them, actualize them. Thank you.